Hi, my name is Elijah, and welcome to my podcast, Songwriting for Songwriters. My special guest today is Steve Knightley. As one half of the duo Show of Hands, Steve Knightley is a UK folk scene national treasure. Show of Hands won the BBC Radio 2 Folk Award. They've sold out the Royal Albert Hall a number of times, built a dedicated and loyal fan base, and he's written some of the most timeless modern folk songs. We spoke about his songwriting process, how he balances narrative songwriting with personal songwriting, his love of listening out for stories to turn into song, his love of folk music and how he got into songwriting, and how he sees the role of a songwriter. So please enjoy this podcast, subscribe, and thank you for being here. Okay, well, joining me on the Songwriting podcast today is Steve Knightley. Steve, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and thank you for this podcast.
Thank you for being my guest. I appreciate it. You're someone who I've followed for a long time, and obviously because we live in the West Country, you're a living legend around these parts. And I was going to ask you, actually, this is the final tour together, a Show of Hands, after 30 years. Is that right?
It's not so much the final tour as we need a sabbatical. Phil needs a sabbatical. He had a bit of health issues earlier in the year. Nothing major, but it gave him pause for thought. And there's so many other things he wants to do, recording projects. He's always been brilliant at mentoring and recording other musicians.
Yeah.
So I think he wanted to take the pressure off touring a bit, festivals and touring. He's done his fair stint.
I'm sure he has.
But we'll obviously look at it again and see where we are. But I've got a lot of stuff I want to do. I've been asked to be involved in a string quartet, writing some songs. I figure you spin enough plates.
Yeah.
Some of them will not break, but some of them will turn up something. So that's what I want to do. We just did this tour with the historian Michael Wood. Fantastic. And that was brilliant. Songs of the people. So there's all these other projects, and so we'll see how that goes.
So when you write for Show of Hands, do you feel is it? My impression is that you write the majority of the songs, or bring most of the songs in and then collaborate. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I bring the songs along, and I tend to bring them along with great big chunky chords, big modal chords, and then Phil decorates it with what instrument he feels works. Fantastic. We never rehearse so much. We just play and play and play, and we evolve a part, and then that slowly solidifies itself. And then after about a year, we record it and try and capture that energy with which we play live, really. So, but obviously I write bearing in mind the audience that we've got. And the palette that we've got as regards acoustic instruments, it's fiddles, mandolins, slide guitars, all that sort of stuff. So, and I think if suddenly I was to pick up a Strat, our audience would be a bit alarmed. That doesn't mean I don't want to occasionally, though.
Yeah, but what is it about? Because obviously, when I've been researching for the podcast, and from what I know, this, you'd be described as, or had been described as, a folk singer-songwriter, someone who grew up playing folk songs and in folk clubs. What is it about folk songwriting that you love? Obviously I'm sure you love other music too, but what is it that captured your heart, folk songwriting, and how would you describe or define folk songwriting?
Well, we are quite unusual. Most of, not our peers, but if you look at the generation below us, if you look at maybe two generations, if you look at the Lakemans and the Rusbys and the Carthys, and all of those guys in Bellowhead and the Saul Roses, they were all offspring of that folk generation.
Yeah.
They're people now in their mid-70s, like Seth Lakeman's dad, So I'm just going to disconnect that mail, by the way, in case I get any more of those pings. We weren't born into it. We were 14 or 15, 16 in East Devon.
Yeah.
And it was a very cool thing to get involved in. It was rock and roll. You had James Taylor, you had Cat Stevens, you had Ralph McTell. They weren't folksy in a sense. No. So if you played an acoustic guitar, and if you were a slightly disconnected loner, and there's all these foreign language students in Exmouth, who want you to play at beach parties, and the people organising the folk clubs are only 10 years above you.
Yeah.
You can hang out with them, smoke and drink and, party. So it was a scene to get involved in.
Sure,
And I
sure.
think if that sets your DNA at that age,
Yeah.
it sort of shapes you for a while. And then, of
Yeah.
course, you get to listen to Dylan and Martin Carthy. And although I strayed for most of my 20s into rock and roll, I mean, like on the London scene, you tend to return to what you
Mm.
know. I think having failed at the rock and roll thing by the age of 32, I moved back to Dorset, in fact, near you, Corsican. And Phil said, "Look, let's go and do some folk clubs." And so I returned to that environment where I learned how to play. And thereafter, it acquires its own momentum. You know.
Brilliant. I mean, I've obviously always played acoustic guitar, but I've not. I write. I would say that sometimes I write kind of folkish songs, but I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a folk songwriter. But it always seems to me that folk scene is incredibly supportive, and it's very. It's a very kind of big scene, isn't it? The folk scene, almost like
Yeah,
the heavy metal scene, has got like a very supportive.
yeah,
Scene. The folk scene has that as well, doesn't it?
yeah. It's very generous, actually. And if in times of crisis, they rally round.
Mm.
I've been times when my son was ill. They collect money and they organize benefits. So because it's, and also the other thing is we stay with, in the early days, we stay with these people. So if
Yeah,
you run a folk club, part of the deal was that you stayed with them afterwards. So
exactly.
you make friends for life.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, there's a lot of bitchiness and moaning, particularly around things like the folk awards. But generally, we look out for each other and collaborate where we can. And it's not like there's the one pot that we're all fighting over. It's not like there's the record deal that only one band can get. There are no record deals.
sure, sure, sure.
There are no lottery ticket moments that you gain and someone else loses. So it's not you're not fighting. And also there's a different vibe to jazz. It's not quite as I think jazz people watch each other in a slightly different way.
Yeah, yeah,
That guy can't cut it, or because it's so technique based.
yeah,
It's you have to be so excellent to play that stuff. If
yeah.
someone can't cut it, you'll soon hear.
So when you so early influences, then you mentioned Dylan and Martin Carthy. Who were your kind of early influences? Who made you pick up a guitar and want to write songs?
It would be, well, to pick up a guitar, it would be Bob Dylan. Although obviously, when I first heard Jimi Hendrix, I wanted to do that.
Yes.
But from a social scene, as I say, in Exmouth, when I was a bit of a loner because my family had moved around a lot,
Okay.
I suddenly found that playing the guitar was a passport to other social scenes that I was sort of excluded from, in a way, if you could play the guitar at a party. So you needed a repertoire. So you go to James Taylor and Bob Dylan, then you discover Bert Jansch and all that first generation of English blues players. And then all of a sudden you had a repertoire. You've got Tom Rush, what's that fantastic song? The Walker Brothers. There's a few
Yeah.
on all of those early Ireland albums. There was always a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
No regrets, no tears, goodbye. You learned mainstream songs on an acoustic guitar, and all of a sudden you had a repertoire.
Yeah.
And then you start getting gigs with a few friends, and it becomes sort of self-sustaining. And then you meet people, you meet your idols. You meet people like Mike Chapman, a fantastic northern songwriter. You suddenly, then I was at college at Coventry, and I was booking these people. I
Yeah.
was booking these people in the days when student unions got funds to book people.
Yeah.
Dick Gocken, we booked him. He fell asleep on our front room drinking whiskey. These were heroes.
Great
Again, they're
record.
part of that generation 10
Yeah.
years older.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of a sudden they were saying, hey, that's a good song. Well done. You're getting acclaim
Great.
from people like Martin Carthy or Tony Rose or any of that generation of folkies. And then you think, gosh, I ought to do more of this because this is how my friends are describing me. Oh, this is Steve. He's a songwriter. Okay, I better start writing some songs. So it becomes self-sustaining, and you're not quite sure at what point the ball rolls in it with its own momentum, but it does at a certain point.
Fantastic.
And then it's how you see yourself, and you're not happy
Yeah.
if you're not doing it.
Yeah, that's true,
You
isn't it?
feel
I remember there was a certain point where I definitely was decided I'm a songwriter, and that's and almost saying it was that kind of embarrassing to begin with, but you've got to own it, haven't you? You've got to own what
Yeah,
you.
you do. And I'm always happier saying songwriter rather than I'm not really comfortable with the word artist so much. I think an artist is you can look at a body of work in a person and say that was an artist. But a lot of these people say, "Hey, I'm an artist. I'm allowed to be late and not know how much things cost." You know, it's like a lot of it is excusing bad behavior
Yeah.
and being unpunctual. But I like the word of being craft, storyteller. You know, and then maybe you could look at someone's body of work and say that was an artist at work because they were consistent to certain principles and certain values, like Martin Carthy. You know, I say that guy's an artist, although his individual songs are not works of art, and I don't think he would claim that they were.
No, I think you're right. I think songwriter is a different you know, for me, I've like, for example, I wouldn't say I'm a musician. I'm a songwriter, and I wouldn't say
Yeah,
I'm an artist. I'm a songwriter, and it's slightly different. I think you're
yeah,
definitely.
I agree. We're storytellers and entertainers. I think
Yeah,
in different styles. I mean, some people do it in a shouty way. Some people do it in an edgy way. Some people do it in an intimate or more gentle way. But we are telling stories, weaving spells. Hopefully,
when you played in rock bands or played the kind of pub club circuit, which I've done, um, to cut through that kind of noise of a bar or a pub, you kind of have to attack it sometimes.
yeah, you do.
And
Yeah,
you know, the kind of in your songs, and not all your songs, but one of the great things about your songs is the rousing anthemic quality.
yeah.
Something that I've you know, which I tried to do as well. And I think some of that, do you think that playing in bars and clubs helped shape you as a writer? Did that cutting through, getting a song across a kind of bar, do you think that did that have an
It's
impact?
utterly, yeah, it's utterly essential. The good thing about pubs, we were based in Bridport for about
Right.
4 years. Peter
Okay.
Wilson took us all the way along the south coast.
Yeah.
A pub, a music bar. Some of them are very good. Some of them have a listening audience. The one that used to be the Castle Hotel in Taunton was great, rocky, raucous audience, but they were listening.
Yeah.
And okay, you can do your Beatles and your Stones and your Pogues and that, but they will book you every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So if every other song you do one of your own, but in that format of come on, here's the chorus, blah
Yeah.
blah blah.
Yeah.
The next time it's that slightly more familiar to the audience, and you can maybe chuck in a couple more.
Yeah.
So by the end of of maybe a year of doing those places, you've got about 16 killer songs.
Yeah.
You go to a folk club with them, and it's a bit whoa, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But you go to a festival, and that's what happened to Phil and I. We took that repertoire to Cambridge, 92. We just blew people away because we had a sound engineer that turned it up to stun. And we had all these pub anthems ready to go, you know. And as I say, it was in the folk clubs that we had to tone it down a bit. And also, we'll do things like straight away introduce a song over the chords. None of this dithering, you know, pace. You know, there's a ballad, now two uppy songs, and then there's a quiet one, now some huge songs, you know, all that sort of stagecraft that's how the Irish learn, you know, that
Yeah.
because they're not
Yeah.
in protected environments. That's
Yeah.
how people learn in Louisiana. That's how they learn in the blues. That's how proper music evolves, I think,
I agree.
in a bit of a battle.
I think there's something really important for songwriters to realize that if you, like you say, if you go to a space where everyone's listening and seated and to listen, and it's that way in folk clubs sometimes, it's like that's different. There's a reverence there. But if you've got to go, you know, in a bar and
Yeah,
win over that, put across that energy, it's a very different thing, isn't it? But I think sometimes as
yeah,
songwriters, your songs get born when you play live, and it's important to kind of let them
yeah.
float in the air and deliver.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you can do something completely unaccompanied, and the drop in the level brings people in the same way. You don't always have to drown them out. But again, that's something that the Irish musicians know instinctively from all that work they do in public spaces. So yeah, it was. We maybe did 6 years of that, but there comes a point when you have had enough of a pub on a Saturday night. You know, you'd rather there was a door price, and at some point you have to make that transition really.
Yeah.
And we did that in '94, and all of a sudden we were in paid environments and small art centres. It's a harder route now. I'm not sure there's so many of those venues out there in the way that there were, but that's another story really.
Fantastic. I mean, you guys have absolutely are known for and have wonderfully kind of carved out and shaped your own destiny and own career. And obviously that point of deciding to knock the Saturday nights on the head and actually, you know, sort of do something a little bit differently. that was a wonderful thing for you guys, and you've kind of gone on to sell out the Royal Albert Hall, and you've got a very loyal fan base that you've worked with that have become friends. Like you just said, it is maybe different now, but that was a very maverick decision to maybe play outside the rules of the music industry and actually own it for yourself.
Yeah, well, there's two things. You can derive principles from necessity and look back at what you've done as this studied walk down a series of conceptual decisions, or you think, how the hell are we going to survive? There is no record company, there is no publisher, there is no major management or agency. And then once you are self-reliant, you try and find that principle from it. But at the time, you're just trying to get by. Now, we had this visionary sound engineer, this Australian called Gerard O'Farrell, who now incidentally is back in the country. He was with us as a sound engineer in about 94, 95, and we got totally stitched up by a promoter in the North Country. He paid himself built-in profits. He paid himself petrol, fuel, phone calls. And when Gerard got the reconciliation, the door take was about £800 and we got 150. And he said, guys, do you want to be in this world? He said, because I don't want to be. I could have booked this gig. We could bring our own sound. We don't need any of this. And we said, yeah, okay, Gerard, go for it. So he built up our internet profile. We made our own records. And all of a sudden that becomes self-sustaining. And that's what you do. And that's how you're described. But who knows if at any point in time Ralph McTell always said if Phil and I had been Irish, we would have been offered a major record deal. And who knows what souls we would have sold to the devil.
Well, it's really good to hear, because it's refreshing, because I suppose if some people will get into music and then quit after a couple of years because they get bored, or they have had enough of the rejection. But it's great to see, and an example of, whether by accident or necessity, and I'm sure there was some very good business there as well, but it's great to see that it is possible to love what you do and to make it work, and to have a relationship with an audience, and to have a long-lasting career. It's what one hopes for.
I think at the end of the day, there were principles at work, and one of the principles was we wanted to empower anybody to book us. We didn't work for fees. We thought, if we're self-contained and someone will organize, feed us, maybe accommodate us, we'll just take a percentage of what they make. And all of a sudden, you're playing in places and to people way off the mainstream circuit, either the folk circuit or the concert circuit. The first guy that put on the Albert Hall was just this software designer from East Anglia. He put us on in a village hall, and I recognized him as a bit of a player.
Yeah.
And I said to Richard, what do you reckon? He said, how many on your mailing list? I said, 1,500. He said, okay, you need 700 to break even. I'll back it.
Wow, great.
So, you meet people like that simply by being outside of a system where a manager is saying, no, they want this, otherwise they're not even going to do your village hall. Yeah. So by being out there, empowering people, we are meeting people who open other doors to you. Yeah. And that is very much a feature of now what's happening. In our little world, we're connecting with people who are very senior in their world. It could be the commanding officer of the local regiment who says, look, why don't you come and play in the battalion museum? So all of a sudden you're meeting people at the top of their little pyramid and connecting them up. It's really very satisfying when that happens.
And it's very collaborative as well, isn't it? And that, like you say, contacts lead to contacts, or there's just the magic of saying yes or being open to what comes to you.
Yeah. And the idea that you reach a certain pinnacle and you want to keep it to yourself and not share it and repel all borders, that's not really the way I see it working. Most people I know, and I meet some people now, as I say, they could be in the military, the clergy, in business, or in art, or whatever it is. If they value music, they want to know you and they want to offer you an environment. And so it's really rewarding when that happens. If they don't value music, you are totally invisible. You don't exist. You are worth.
In a way, that is the kind of, in a way, a sort of folk tradition, or the wandering minstrels. There is something in that, isn't there? Like, you'd imagine that back in, I don't know, medieval days, with someone playing a lute, he'd go from town to town and maybe get some food and maybe a few coins and would sing songs. It's very traditional.
All of a sudden, someone in the court says, look, you can be the court minstrel and then you get a taste of that world for a bit. So it's as a musician, you do cross lots of cultural and social and economic boundaries if what you do is valued. As I say, the people that don't value us, we don't meet because we don't encounter them. But I can think of a lot of examples. For example, Michael Wood, this historian, I mean, a formidable career.
Yeah.
He loved Cousin Jack, and he said, "Well, why don't we do a show, Songs of the People?" So now we've got a guy on stage who's a household name, simply because in his world, a song that I wrote and what we do has value.
Sure.
And we're going to be doing that at Glastonbury. And presumably somebody there will say, "Hey, I've got a lovely little medieval museum setting. Why don't you come and do that?" And as long as your antenna are out there, and you keep wanting to share it, then those opportunities, I think, they only increase. They don't decrease.
Fantastic. Now you're known and loved for being a songwriter who addresses, history, politics, social issues, rural issues, poverty, the inequality of life. You raise these things, and often use narrative songwriting to do that. How much of you as a person, your feelings, your inner world, what's the balance between the kind of the issues and the narrative and you in there? How do you mix those different voices? Is it all you, do you think, or how do you balance that?
Well, because I did politics and history, I know that what you consider the truth is a very flexible thing. It's like the current thing with Ukraine. There's some very, very, very sea change, big forces at work underneath that crisis.
Absolutely.
And it's not all about baddies and goodies, and it never is in history. And that's one thing that you learn. So I tend not to suddenly, here's a song about Ukraine. I tend to avoid that. It's like 9/11. I tend to avoid those issues, like the plague. I mean, the thing about greedy bankers, that's like ducks in a barrel. So I don't tend to get drawn into party politics either. I didn't get drawn into anything about the referendum because I don't want to lose connection with an audience that might not agree with me. Otherwise, I'm only talking in an echo chamber. But if you sing about a song like Santiago working with Chilean musicians, it's obviously that we come from a collaborative and multicultural experience, and we value that. So I don't have to point at people and say, "You're a baddie." Because what seems to be happening now is people say, "I don't like your opinion, therefore I don't like you." Whereas it used to be, "I quite like you, but I don't agree with you about that." And I hate that polarization. So we have to walk a very tight line. I'm going to start to do a song called "Cutthroats, Crooks, and Conmen." Again, that was quite Thatcherite in a way, but without being specific. But I'll add a verse about the NHS. But again, I'm not going to get stuck to a particular cause, either the Countryside Alliance, the fox hunting thing. It's much more complex than that. And I want to go to a village hall and like Cattastock and do a subtle anti-hunting song that they might not have thought of it before, and it's like, I want to be in front of those people and not maybe no, Knightley, he's one of those, or he's left or right. So, and it's it can be complex, and you can get it wrong and you can fall off the fence sometimes, but on the whole, it makes economic and I think artistic sense just to be slightly outside of it. Maybe like Dylan has been, in a way. You can't pin him down.
I think you're right there, because when you listen back, because I've obviously done research for podcasts, and that kind of idea came up. Of you been, I think they called you the gravel voiced of the
spokesman of the rule. I'll buy that.
It's beautiful phrase, but you listen to your stuff and think, okay, well, there's issues here and stuff coming up, but like you said, if you take a song like "The Man I Was," that's a very, very beautiful song about being a man. It's not like, what I'm trying to say is, it's not like, okay, this guy is clearly supporting this political party and he thinks these things about these issues, although it's there, it's like you said, it's nuanced, and you are narrating and going to places which are, I don't know, like you said, it's generous. You're taking your audience with you, and you're not sort of telling them what's bad or good. It often feels to me like you're telling me a story, and in that story I can find you there and some issues as well. It's a balance, like you say, isn't it?
Well, the thing about, if you come from a folk background, you have been the farmer's boy, you've been the drummer at Waterloo, you have been the female sailor, you've been all those characters in your narrative.
Yeah.
And I make a joke about it. No one comes up to you. You can sing songs about whaling and wenching and fox hunting. Nobody thinks it's you. And when you write from that, it's like, for example, country life. I'm just the guy that can't afford to live in his own village. I'm not saying burn second homes necessarily. I'm just saying, the pub's closed down and we don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm singing to people, a lot of them will have second homes, and they go, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe a pause for thought is all you can hope for with people, really.
Yeah. Sure. I think you're right. Just maybe catching someone's attention for a second and perhaps changing their perspective through. I mean, good art does that, doesn't it? It doesn't smack you
Yeah.
over the face. It just makes you think for a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
So when you're writing a song, what's your process? How does a song arrive for you? What, is there a kind of way that it happens, or is it different each time? What's the kind of how does the song arrive?
Occasionally I have the idea for a song. I have like wouldn't it be, because I've got working on one at the moment, like do it, because you're surrounded with people who go, oh, I'm going to do this. And I'm thinking, just do it. Jump right in. Maybe you'll sink, maybe you'll swim. Just do it. So then, okay, that's the idea of the song. And I might have a riff. So I got that, right?
Fantastic.
So I had that riff for ages.
Fantastic.
And the idea of the song, just do it.
Yeah.
So now I got to think, okay, how many other situations can I apply that to? Okay, someone's moaning about their job. Someone is always wanted to ask a girl out, and do it, mate. Just do it. Someone is always saying, I got to get in touch with my old man again. So there's the idea of the song. I marry it to a little chord sequence that I've got. Then the hard work is actually shaping the context, really. And so that is a clear example.
Okay.
Other times, for story songs, I got a song like The Preacher or Transported. Yeah. I'm just thinking in my head of what would be a good story to tell someone. I always say, what do you know? What do you see? What do you love? That's my 3 rules. You're in a pub. And you see people in the pub. You say, you wouldn't believe what happened to me today. This thing came out, and it's like, that's a real story being told there, And that's possibly more the folk tradition. And people tell stories to each other, and they get very good at it. And sometimes you take a story and then you turn that into a song. Again, like The Preacher, the guy who prays for bad luck to befall a rival, put it in Portland in the quarries. Okay, what could happen next? What could happen next? And then I try and find the music for it. So I'm always spinning those different ideas for songs.
Fantastic.
And then at other times, less often, there'll be something like Man I Was or Hook of Love or You're Mine. I just want to be slightly more confessional.
Yeah.
And say, look, yeah, I really regret what happened on a personal level, and this is the way I can maybe not apologize, but account for it.
Beautiful.
So and you can put them in all those different categories, maybe.
Yeah, it's good that, because I think as songwriters, often as a writer, have different voices.
Yeah.
And there's like the love voice, the universal love voice, or the relationship love voice. Then there's the kind of like, I don't know, the sort of confessional sort of thing. So it's good to hear like how, because you can really hear that in your writing. That there's the storyteller, there's the kind of, like you said, there's the kind of do it uplifting storyteller, uplifting guy, then the confessional thing, and that mix. I guess that's why we all love you, is that mix of 3 things. It's not just one writer saying the same thing, it's a mixture of 3 different people, which is, I think.
Well, the voice I hate is the classic, yeah, we got an album coming out, and that singer-songwriter, self-centered. We've worked with some people, and they stood in front of an audience. They go, I was in a bar in Amsterdam, like you never are. Yeah. And suddenly I had this idea, like you never had. And this girl came up and like, you've never happened, and they elevate their experience above a load of people. And right in front of them, there's a woman who's raising a disabled kid on her own. There's a guy who's dragged someone out of a car crash as a first responder. There's tales of bravery sitting in front of them that make their pathetic little emotional dramas totally redundant. And so I've always avoided that sort of, there's a certain ego, you spot it, you hear it in a tone of voice. And it makes me sort of immediately sort of bristle. And the folk scene has always been a bit suspicious of that, particularly the hardcore, more traditional folk scene. Sure. They've dismissed a lot of songwriters as that sort of beast, a bit unfairly. But I'd rather that they did that than just lauded, all that self-indulgence, because it's yeah, it's a bit much. People chronicle their own personal landscape as if it's really, as if it's crucial. It's so
Mm.
painful to them. It's going to have to be painful to everyone else as well. So,
Yeah. And also, you've raised something about the importance of listening, like you say, of whether it's the woman in the audience raising a son on her own or something. Like, if you get
yeah,
to listen to fans or listen to people talk, you hear stories, and there's a lot of fodder for songs, aren't there, when you open your ears
yeah,
and listen.
and also on this tour, on this work we've just done, people come up and say, "Can I tell you how much that song meant to my late husband?" All right, shit. There's a reminder.
Yeah.
Don't be glib about this. Don't just, oh, that's good to know. Yeah, no, they're saying something important. That was something he listened to or they listened to, or how they met, or how they courted, or how their kids were born. It's all sorts of things. These songs are moments in people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget that.
It's
But
very
because we
easy to
meet
get that.
people so personally every night, they
Yeah.
do remind you of it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tears and hugging goes on after gigs sometimes. People come up and, over COVID, things happened in their life, and they lost connection with that for a while.
Yeah.
And they're very glad that you're still there, because the music is a constant.
I
It's
think
a soundtrack.
Yeah, I think you've hit something really on the head there, because I guess any at some point, if you're a musician, like there's a level of like wanting to make it or wanting to be seen to make whatever that is, whether it's a
Yeah,
radio play, an award, or whatever, TV
yeah,
advert, whatever. There's that element which can be exciting and great and all good. But when you are told by someone who's gone through something that your song has healed or soothed or they celebrated to it,
yeah,
it can it's such a big thing, but it's kind of a tiny thing at the same time. But that's the truth
yeah,
of songwriting, isn't it? When you
yeah,
yourself as a music fan, when you hear someone's song and it just sums everything up in your life and you put it on repeat or whatever, that is
yeah,
actually what's happening. It's like we are relating to someone else through a song. And when
yeah.
you've had the opportunity, or when you have that gift, I guess, that somebody feels that way about your song, it's what we're in it for, isn't it, really?
Yeah, but I think it's very important as soon as you walk away to forget that when you start writing the next one.
Yes, yes.
Otherwise, you think, "Oh Christ,
Yeah.
how can I match that?" I
Yeah,
always say you have to sort of think it's the best thing ever written, but also be aware that it could possibly be the worst. And you never really know
that's
until
true.
it's out there with a
That's
life of
true.
its own.
That's true. You don't know which song is going to be the one which is
No,
taken into people's hearts, do you? It's
no,
just
no.
carry on being a writer. If
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
to say, if somebody had never heard your stuff before, and you were to say, this is a slightly difficult question, I guess, but what three songs would you say, if you could, I don't know if you can say this, define you, or do you think if define, are you most proud of, or do you think kind of define you as a writer? If you could pull up two or three examples of your songs that you think could do that or introduce people to your songs in that way.
I think The Man I Was would be one,
Yeah.
because I think there's a poetic sensibility there that everyone will recognise. I think something like The Preacher of Widdicombe Fair or The Galway Farmer, a straightforward storytelling song.
Yeah.
And then it has to be something like AIG, Roots or Country Life, one of the more shouty songs. So I think that covers the spectrum really
Yeah.
of what where I'm coming from. Maybe A Man I Was and Hook of Love or something like that. They're in that songwriter sort of domain in a way, or
Yeah.
the one that I was just slagging off. But that's um, a bit unfair to these people, because when one of those songwriters gets it right, there is nothing more powerful.
Yeah.
When the person, the sound, the image, everything makes this complete statement, then it's like, then you've got something that's virtually unstoppable. It's very rare, but when it works, Cat Stevens at his best,
Yeah, sure.
it really is something exceptional. James Taylor at his best, or there's a unity of all those factors going on, but it doesn't always exclude the 90% of pompousness.
Indulgence. um, how important is it to you when you go either when you're playing on your own or with show of hands? You're a prolific writer, so you're writing all the time. How important is it for you to play new songs live?
I should be more prolific, to be honest. I should be doing 10 songs a year, really.
Okay.
There's no reason why I shouldn't be, and people would. Tom Robbins says just write and write and write. And the more rubbish you write, the more chance you get of writing a good one. So I am aware that I'm going out to do some gigs with the same songs, and I try and the first thing you do is rearrange stuff you've already written, slow it down, and change keys and all that sort of stuff. Maybe find a couple of good cover versions. I'm doing a cover version of Fisherman's Blues at the moment, a really slow, moody one.
Yeah.
And then you need to put in a couple of new things,
Yeah.
even though they might not go down as well or not compromise the gig. But the last thing people want to hear at a festival is here's a bunch of new songs, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
But unless you put them in every now and then, you never develop a canon of new material, corpus, as it were. So I am aware, and I can look at set lists as they go back and think, okay, I'm not going to repeat that in the same way.
Sure. Do you have this idea of the muse, and you've explained a little bit earlier on about how you all write different songs, and I've asked this question to each person on the podcast so far, but some people have some far out otherworldly relationship with the muse, and other people just see or hear something. But what's your feelings about the concept of a muse, and how does it show up for you, and what's your relationship with it, if you have one?
Do you mean like an inner creative spirit or something that inspires you? Yeah, it depends how you define it, really, doesn't it? But I think what I've got, somebody told me this man called Philip Rawson, who lived near me in the wilds near Korskum. He was a formidable intellectual. He looked like a Russian intellectual with a beard down to there. And he came to see me play, and he said, you have a poetic sensibility. And I know some very well-known musicians who don't.
Yeah.
But I took that on board, and that is my muse, if you like. I want to find a story, and I want to connect it to something that touches as many people. So you generalize the story, and then you become part of a continuum of storytellers, and you become a part of a continuum. And they could be biblical stories, it could be Cain and Abel, it could be George and the Dragon, it could be all of these, and then you're in that context, and I've never seen myself in that context until maybe the last 10 years. Okay. I've always been slightly anti-spiritual, anti-religious. Okay. But lately I've been putting my what I do in a context, because people like Philip Rawson have been coming up to me, and also some very, very formidable religious people over the years. And they say, you know what you do, don't you? And I go, yeah, I write songs. They go, no. You connect them. And I go, and I've always sort of put it to one side. But now I'm really pleased to be able to put myself in that context of the stories that make us slightly progress as a species and as people, about sharing, about entertaining, about not exploiting, whatever those things are. So if I have a muse, it's that sense of what connects the most people in a poetic way and in a life affirmative way. And I try and be true to that. And some people would give it a religious name, some people would call it various names, but I think it's something that we recognize. And I think the first person that stood up in the mouth of a cave and said to a group of people, listen to what happened, and engages people, and there's a message in it, and there's something which entertains but also moves people. I think there is that spirit, which I suppose is as close as I can come to answering your question.
Well, that's a really great answer, that, because I think it's a unique answer. It's your answer, and it's a very beautiful way to describe your creativity, because everyone's is different, but that's a very nice way to answer that question. And thank you for answering it so eloquently. That's great. Okay, what do you personally love about songwriting? For you, just there's this communication, there's the storytelling, there's the connection with people. What does Steve Knightley, what do you love? What feelings come up in you when you write a song? What's the love of it for you?
The first thing I love is, thank God I can still do it.
Yeah.
Thank God I've still got that poetic sensibility and that ability to create something that never existed before and now is out there. So when people clap it and sing along, that is so nourishing. You know, that's such a life affirmative thing, particularly on a solo gig, where from the moment it might be a village hall, the moment I'm there, I've created a whole world of stories for people, and they go away, and it's not about your relationship with them. I've often said this. It's about their relationship with each other. Everybody for that time is less isolated, frightened, alone. They've had a collective experience, which, without putting it in religious terms, I think is something that we need as a species, a collective reaction. And it could be through poetry, it could be dance or cinema, but you've created this thing out of these disparate people that didn't exist before. And everybody goes away feeling nourished, and you can be tired and you can be hungover, and you can have all sorts of stuff going on at home. That's not important. You've made it happen again, and you've made it happen through your songs, and that is an amazing feeling. I would not want to stop the process that makes that happening over and over again by stopping writing songs. So when you come up with a new 4 or 5 songs and it's still doing it, there is that relief, you know. There is that very much that relief.
I mean, I totally hear you on that. It's almost pretentious to call it a gift. It's maybe something, it's maybe a craft that's been learned, but sometimes it does feel like receiving a gift rather than one having a gift. It feels like when you write a new song, if it does that, you're absolutely right. You go, thank God I can still do it. Sometimes it's like, I don't know where that comes from, but like, it's joyful, isn't it?
I think you're right about the not knowing where it comes from. Sometimes it just works its way through you, and I think it does. I think you can be a prism that focuses all these different rays of light into something, if you're open and maybe not thoughtless, but just let it sort of happen in a way. I know there's a couple of young singers I know who they don't put their ego. I'm talking about folk singers like Jackie Oates, really, and some other people. They just let the music work the way, and it's like it's coming straight off the field in medieval England. You know, it's such a gift, and you can do that as a songwriter if you listen to people, listen to their stories, and try and reflect their experiences in an honest and not sort of attention-seeking way. And then it's about craft. It's about, okay, well, I've used those chords before, I've used that rhythm before, I've used that instrument before. How else can I say the same thing? So it's you're constantly working at it, and you're constantly learning stuff as well, which is a good thing, you know.
What do you, if you ever get writer's block, do you just wait for that to pass, or do you have a way of kind of stimulating yourself into past the writer's block?
The last time it really happened, I needed 4 or 5 new songs, and I found a lovely Airbnb down the other side of Saltash, and I went down and stayed at this lovely little place in a little village. It subsequently got pounded by the westerlies that washed away all the dunes in Exmouth. It must have been about 2015. Long way home. I wrote about 6 songs. I just went away. And I'm thinking of doing that again. I met some lovely people at a place called Bloomsbury Garden Centre in Kent. It's full of lovely sort of yurts and little pagodas, and they're a great couple. And I suddenly thought, if I could come away here for 3 days and tell myself I need to come up with at least 5 songs, 4 to 5 songs. So I might do that. I have to take myself out of the home environment because I live in a house of great clamour and noise. You know, I've got 3 kids. Well, they're 21, 19 and 17 now. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, sure.
My oldest son, Jack, has just hit about 400 million views on TikTok now.
Fantastic.
He's got a massive TikTok following.
Fantastic.
Massive.
Yeah,
he won't use my bloody music though. So, but
as a musician himself, is he a songwriter or?
No, he does little observational comedy things. He's a very good drummer.
Fantastic.
But he's now able to monetize his profile.
Brilliant.
So and there's something about what he does that in the storytelling. Self-effacing country boy stories. So
fantastic.
So I need to go away to write, and if I'm not on the road, if I'm on the road, I can write. So and then again, I might just drive along, and suddenly I hear an expression, and I think, that's an expression I can generalize in a poetic sense. And occasionally, I need to write them down, otherwise I forget them. and then that's kickstarting another song. But I've got an awful lot of stuff on the back burner, maybe about 8 or 9 songs that I'm like Do It, that I just
Yeah.
need to finish off now.
Yeah. I generally have like three or four. I tend to find for me like songs come in threes, and they will relate to each other, and kind of they'll come in threes, and they'll be cooking along at the same time, and then they'll kind of
Yeah,
come out as a little group, and then there'll be the
yeah,
next three. You know.
yeah.
I've got some fan questions here. I've spoken to some long dogs who would like to ask you a few
Yeah, I
questions.
saw that. I saw the questions.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
the first one, which I thought was quite an interesting one, actually, was what song from a musical would you sing?
a musical,
Yeah.
any musical.
Yeah, this is Caroline asking this question. What song from a musical would you sing? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I thought it was quite an interesting question, that one.
Wow, that's a very good question.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of a musical that obviously I've got Cousin Jack in the Fisherman's Friends musical,
yeah.
but that doesn't really count. Um, I really love that one in The Greatest Entertainer when she suddenly the Swedish opera singer starts singing and everyone is gobsmacked. Take my hand, and it's really schmaltzy, but it's
Excellent.
such a beautiful, beautiful song. So I'd like that. I used to one of my favorites was Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. I used to like all of that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
and anything by Sinatra, I think Guys and Dolls. I can't think of anything particular. I'd like to do a proper crooning song.
You should so
Yeah,
do that. I like a croon.
yeah.
Crooning is a good thing. Great, good answer. Okay, another question, if you don't mind, is she may have just. This is from Diane. Do you have any unfinished songs that you're sitting on, waiting for the right time?
Not the right time, just waiting for me to get off my ass and finish it. I've got about 6 actually.
Great.
I've got about 6, and I will get around to doing them. Do It is one of them, and I've got yeah. There's a few things ready to go, and I will come up with them because I need to make a solo album very soon.
Yeah.
I've got about 6 songs that Show of Hands have never recorded, including The Ride and various other things that I will record. So the next thing for me will be a solo album,
Fantastic.
and that will have 12 songs on it. It probably have 8 of mine, 2 covers, and 2 folk songs as a normal sort of balance.
Fantastic. And one more final question from your fan base here. This is from Anatole, I think that's how you pronounce it. Before COVID, you promised you'd write some more melancholic songs. Not that we
Yeah,
don't like the jolly trio format, but we would really appreciate some heartbreakers like Widdicombe Fair and The Preacher. How's what would be your answer to that?
I'm going to do that. I think if I'm not writing for fiddles and mandolins and necessary the Show of Hands palette,
Yeah.
then I think I can go down the singer-songwriter path that I so
Yeah. Yeah.
vehemently despised earlier and do some emotional landscape stuff, because there's no end to emotional energy in the audience, whatever age they are, yeah, so yeah, I will do that, and thank you for the kick up the rear from Antonio and whoever that was.
Fantastic. When this is, I was reading your Wikipedia the other day, and you, as you said earlier, you taught at Bedminster School, and one of the people, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but one of the people you at Wikipedia claims you taught was PJ Harvey.
Yeah.
Did you, from the point of view of being a teacher, and this is obviously because did you have a sense of her great songwriting and kind of spark of creativity at that young age? Could you see that then, or was that something which?
No, it happened in a slightly different way. Is that her mum didn't come to me I wasn't teaching at Bedminster at the time.
Right.
I went on to teach there. There was just this. Eva was at the door, and this girl, 17 maybe, or with a load of hair all over her face, very shy, said, "Look, do you teach guitar?" And I just arrived from London, and I was like the punk rocker who lived on the hill. Will you give my daughter guitar lessons? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. So we did a deal in exchange for Hamstone and topsoil, because Ray and Eva lived just down the road from me. And so I think I must have given Polly maybe 12 lessons on guitar. She played me her first ever song, her first ever gig. We did the Village Fete at Bedminster.
Brilliant.
And we also played out the Bell Inn at Ash. I didn't, if I'm perfectly honest, I didn't spot it. I spotted this incredible musician because I didn't teach her any of the folky chords. I taught her the big sort of C sharp minors and the big power chords.
Sure.
She seemed more interested in them than playing Dylan.
Yeah.
So the big modal shapes, you know, I don't know if this guitar's in tune. No, it's not in tune. Eva kept saying to me, well, Polly's written some songs, and she said, why don't you play them? And Polly didn't really want to. And when Eva was out of the room, I pretended to be looking at some books on the shelf. And I said, I wouldn't mind hearing it. And it was like, fuck. And this, wow, this sort of like primal stuff came out. And I thought, oh, interesting. I don't know where she goes with it.
Yeah.
And then about 2 years later, the boys from the pub said, oh, we went to see Polly at Yeovil. God, she's a fucking beast. Unbelievable. She was playing with the 3-piece band. And then I got the record dry and I realized what she was doing, you know, and I didn't spot it, to be perfectly honest. I thought that coming from such a lovely background, she'd settled for Dorset country life.
Yeah.
But obviously she became one of the most important indie rock artists we've had. And I had a tiny.
Of course you did.
But also Phil sold her first guitar as a first electric guitar.
Fantastic.
When she started working with John Parrish. So yeah, and we say hello, and I've seen her at some family occasions in the last 5 or 6 years as well. Yeah,
fantastic. Let me ask you one final question, and thank you very much for being here today. Really appreciate hearing your wisdom and honesty about your songwriting process. And here's a question which I ask everybody, which will change from day to day. But it's a question: if you could have written any other song, if you could have spent some time with it going around your head and lived with it by another artist or songwriter, what song here today would you pick as a song you would love to have written and live with?
The most perfect pop song ever written is "Message in a Bottle" by the Police.
Nice.
I wish I'd written "Tunnel of Love" by Dire Straits.
Lovely.
Not as the up-tempo rock and roll one, but as an evocation of seaside. And I remember the fairground in Exmouth, being a sort of lovesick 16-year-old, watching all these confident people interact and feeling, hell, it looks so pretty to me, like it always did. I think that is an extraordinary evocation of English seaside town life. And having always lived by the sea, I do a very, very slow version of that, and I'll probably do that again. But I think that's a great song, you know.
Do you think
Tunnel of Love.
Do you think the sea impacts your songwriting?
Yeah, it's in everything, really.
Yeah.
Time and tides, and if ever my wife wants to take the piss out of me, because here we go, time and tides and roots and braves and branches and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I've always lived within sight, you know, even as I can see it out the window now. You know, so.
Yeah. Fantastic. Steve, thank you very much for your time, mate. And so, you know, it's really good to, as I said, to hear what you've got to say about songwriting. One final question. If you had any advice to a songwriter, or a piece of guidance or advice to a new songwriter or somebody who's just, you know, wants to write more, what a piece of advice would you give to them?
Don't imagine there's a lottery ticket moment, despite what people say. Oh, they had a friend who had a friend who wrote a song for someone. I would say there isn't really, but there is a wonderful journey to the shops to see if there is. You know, the chance that you'll come up with we make a joke all the time. For example, we're off to 2 days' time. We're doing a cruise, a concert cruise with Richard Thompson.
Fantastic.
And we're going to be getting on this lovely barge in Baal and going down the Rhine to Amsterdam and playing 2 shows a night. And at some point, I will say to Phil, just think, Phil, just one hit song, take us away from all this squalor.
Brilliant.
You know, don't even think about that. Just try and connect with as many people. Work with what you know and love and what you see, and making music. That's the end in itself. It's a life affirmative thing to do, and just be lucky, really. And the worst thing you can do is be successful in your 20s, because you'll be screwed up forever, and it won't be till your 50s till you get over it. You know. Oh, there's one last anecdote. This is a great one. About 10 years ago, there was a little thing in the Sunday Times, a day in the life, Glenn Tilbrook. squeezed. Somebody had gone over to Los Angeles. He was in a great big mobile home people carrier with his wife and their sound engineer. And he was going to do a little theater in Pasadena. And he drove into the theater and he did a lovely show and he got into the and he went on to the next place. And the end of it said, look, you Arctic Monkeys and you Blurs and you Oasis, this could be you in 30 years, but only if you're really lucky. And I thought that was exactly it. You know, you're still doing what you love at a certain age to people enjoy what you're doing. So that's all you can hope for, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate your time.
Good. And this is one of the best interviews I've done as well. So well done,
good.
you.